It wasn't just his punctuality that won her over. Nirov always smelled fresh, and his cheerful demeanor had a way of softening Bhavya's long-neglected heart. Being around him made her feel alive and youthful again, a stark contrast to her life at home with Mr. Manon. Manon, with his grumpy disposition, unkempt appearance, and deepening wrinkles, was a far cry from Nirov's energy and vitality. Hello, and welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into another shocking and real-life story that will leave you speechless. This time, our tale comes from Kolhapur, a town in Maharashtra, India. It's about an elderly couple who, instead of focusing on their golden years and finding peace, found themselves tangled up with a young, burly man in a bizarre twist of events. Things spiraled so far out of control that the grandfather resorted to desperate measures for the sake of his idol. Curious about what happened? Stay with us as we uncover all the details behind this unbelievable case. Let's dig deeper. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this story with your friends. It's one you won't want to miss. So, here's the story. It's about a couple, Manon and Bhavya, who got married back in 1984 in a small town called Adamapur, India. Both were teachers when they met, and their shared profession brought them together. After tying the knot, they built a family with their first child born in 1986 and their youngest in 1988. Over the years, their careers took them to different parts of the state, but in 2014, they finally settled down in Kolhapur after retiring. Their eldest son got married and moved to Sangli with his wife, while the youngest, Lohit, stayed closer to home in Kolhapur. Lohit and his wife run a sari business and have 2 daughters. Because he lives just 17 kilometers away, Lohit visits his parents often, usually riding his motorcycle to check in on them. Despite Lohit's proximity, Manon and Bhavya decided to live independently. They handled their own cooking, cleaning, and laundry, firmly believing they were still capable and didn't need household help. In 2016, Bhavya received an unexpected offer to become the principal of a private school in Kolhapur. Known for her discipline and leadership, she was initially hesitant. After all, she was already 55. But eventually, she agreed, adding even more responsibilities to her daily life. Meanwhile, Manon, now retired, spent his days fishing or socializing at a neighbor's house, playing chess and cards with friends until late at night. This created a growing rift between the couple. Bhavya often came home from work exhausted and hoped her husband would pitch in with small tasks around the house, like sweeping the floor or watering the plants. After all, she cooked for him every morning before leaving for school. But instead of helping, Manon would dismiss her requests, insisting that housework wasn't his responsibility. This attitude led to frequent arguments. Bhavya became increasingly frustrated, especially since Manon refused to hire help, leaving her to juggle work and household chores alone. The fights escalated. Bhavya resented her husband's lazy routine, sleeping in, eating breakfast, and slipping out for the day without so much as lifting a finger around the house. Manon, on the other hand, felt unfairly nagged and refused to budge. Their son Lohit often stayed over, trying to mediate between his parents, but his efforts were in vain. Neither Manon nor Bhavya was willing to compromise. Their stubbornness and childish refusal to admit fault kept the tension alive, turning their once peaceful home into a battleground of unresolved conflicts. Long story short, things were peaceful during the pandemic because Bhavya wasn't teaching, and she and Manon got along better. But once life started returning to normal, so did their old habits. By early 2021, the men in their housing complex were back to their regular gatherings, playing chess and cards. There wasn't anything wrong with these activities. Most of them were retired after all, but Manon's inability to manage his time drove Bhavya up the wall. He'd spend all day with his friends, forgetting to eat, and then come home complaining about stomach aches or catching a cold. The late-night chess games were the worst. If Bhavya called him to eat or reminded him to come home, he'd scold her in front of his friends, accusing her of nagging and not letting him enjoy himself. Meanwhile, Bhavya was juggling her job as a principal, waking up early to beat the morning traffic, and hoping Manon would step up to help her just a little. But every time she asked, he'd have an excuse. He was too tired, too sleepy, or not feeling well. Yet somehow, those complaints vanished whenever it was time to fish or play chess. Frustrated, Bhavya started relying on online motorcycle taxis to get to school. Public transport was too slow, and regular taxis were out of her budget. But even ride-hailing apps weren't perfect. Sometimes, finding a driver took so long that she'd end up late to school. One day, a young sports teacher named Nirav noticed her struggle and offered to give her a ride. It worked out perfectly since Nirav lived along the same route. As a gesture of gratitude, Bhavya offered to cover his gas money, just enough for a pack of cigarettes, she joked. At first, Bhavya was hesitant. As the principal, she worried about how it might look if she got too close to one of the male teachers. She had worked hard to maintain her reputation as a professional and disciplined leader, admired by her staff. But once she started riding with Nirav, her worries melted away. Nirav's company was pleasant and calming. Bhavya felt safe and comfortable around him, and his cheerful demeanor often made her smile. They soon fell into a routine, commuting together every morning and afternoon, always on time. There were no delays, no dramas, and Bhavya started to look forward to their rides. Nirav was not only dependable but also well-groomed, and his warm smile had a way of brightening her day. For Bhavya, being around the young, energetic sports teacher was a refreshing change. At home, she was stuck with Manan, grumpy, unkempt, and weighed down by age. Nirav, on the other hand, was lively and kind, making Bhavya feel younger and happier. Over time, Bhavya and Nirav's relationship grew closer. Bhavya began finding reasons to spend more time with him, inviting him for biryani, helping him shop for glasses at the mall, and other small errands that gave them an excuse to be together. Bhavya, who initially thought Nirav was single due to his fit physique and youthful looks, was disappointed to learn he was married. Still, she didn't let that stop her. She even started giving him extra money weekly, far more than just gas reimbursement. Their bond deepened to the point where they began checking into hotel rooms 2 or 3 times a week, under the guise of having long conversations. To Bhavya, Nirav became more than just a driver. She treated him like a lover. Nirav, however, was reluctant. While he never outright refused her, he also avoided letting things go too far physically. By October 2021, Manan started noticing something off. Bhavya had been spending more time on calls and sending voice notes, sparking his suspicions. But the thought of his aging wife having another man seemed absurd. Still, her frequent late returns, always with the excuse of school activities, made him uneasy. Finally, he shared his concerns with their son, Lohit. Together, they decided to follow Bhavya after school in November. Their worst suspicions were confirmed. They saw Bhavya and Nirav entering a jasmine-themed hotel, leaving Manan and Lohit stunned. They waited for an hour, and when neither emerged, they stormed into the lobby. Showing a photo of Bhavya, they demanded to know what room she and her companion were in. Just as they were causing a scene, Bhavya and Nirav stepped out of the elevator. Lohit, unable to contain his anger, punched Nirav and threatened him. He then grabbed his mother and dragged her home, seething with rage. Back at the house, a heated argument ensued. Bhavya insisted they were just talking and that nothing inappropriate had happened. She defended herself, saying the house was always empty. Manan spent his evenings playing chess until midnight and didn't keep her company. She claimed she needed someone to talk to and blamed the growing distance in her marriage for seeking companionship elsewhere. Lohit, however, was furious. As a school principal, his mother's actions, even if innocent, risked tarnishing her reputation and embarrassing the family. "What were you doing at a hotel if nothing was going on?" he yelled. He demanded Bhavya cut all ties with Nirav and even went as far as sending threatening messages to the young teacher. He warned Nirav to stay away from his mother or face severe consequences. Terrified by the threats, Nirav completely withdrew. He stopped picking up Bhavya, avoided her entirely, and even began skipping school. On the other hand, Mr. Manan, who had always been a jealous and temperamental man, found himself spiraling. He had a zero-tolerance policy when it came to infidelity, and his suspicions about Bhavya's behavior were eating away at him. For about a month after the hotel incident, he insisted on driving Bhavya to work himself. However, he refused to pick her up in the evenings, leaving her to rely on online motorcycle taxis. After 2 months though, Manan began to tire of the daily commute. He complained about the traffic on the route to her school and started skipping the morning drop-offs as well. Bhavya returned to using motorcycle taxis regularly. But in early December, Manan's suspicions reignited. For 2 weeks straight, Bhavya was dropped off by the same driver, a young man in a black helmet. This struck Manan as odd, as ride-hailing apps typically assign different drivers for each trip. Fueled by paranoia, Manan began keeping an eye on Bhavya's movements. Then came a Sunday in December 2021. Bhavya claimed she needed to attend a school art event that would run late into the evening. Manan dropped her off but couldn't pick her up because he had plans to go fishing and play chess with his friends. When he returned home later that night, Bhavya still hadn't arrived. By 10 p.m., Manan was pacing the terrace, restless and anxious. Despite his usual indifference, something about that night didn't sit right with him. At 10:30 p.m., a motorcycle pulled up in front of the house. The rider, wearing a black helmet, stopped at the gate, and Bhavya got off the back. Overcome with rage, Manan grabbed the knife he had been carrying and charged at the young man. Without hesitation, he attacked the driver, stabbing him repeatedly until the man collapsed to the ground. Neighbors, alarmed by the commotion, rushed to the scene and immediately took the injured rider to the nearest hospital. Tragically, the young man couldn't be saved. Meanwhile, Manan, still seething, surrendered himself to the authorities. Bhavya was left in shock and hysterics. The young man Manan had killed wasn't an online motorcycle taxi driver after all. He was Kavalya, a 22-year-old security guard at Bhavya's school. For the past few weeks, Kavalya had been helping Bhavya with rides to and from work out of kindness, and there had been nothing inappropriate about their arrangement. Now, the young man had lost his life in a tragic misunderstanding fueled by jealousy and mistrust. The investigation revealed that Mr. Manan deeply regretted his actions. He admitted that his jealousy and anger had clouded his judgment, pushing him to commit an unthinkable act. That night, when his wife took longer than usual to come home, his mind jumped to the worst conclusion, that she was spending time with a young man who had been giving her rides over the past few weeks. His suspicions were fueled by memories of the earlier incident when Bhavya had grown close to Nirov, which also began with frequent rides, led to late returns, and eventually escalated into hotel meetups. Adding to the confusion, the motorcycle and the build of the driver that night bore a resemblance to Nirov's. The dim lighting and Mr. Manan's deteriorating eyesight only made it harder for him to see clearly. But this time, he was wrong. As Bhavya later explained, she had completely cut ties with Nirov, who no longer worked at her school, and hadn't been in contact with him for months. The young man who had been giving her rides recently was Kavalya, the school's security guard. Kavalya had started helping Bhavya purely out of kindness. He had noticed her struggle to find reliable motorcycle taxi drivers and decided to step in. For him, it was also a way to earn a little extra money, as his salary as a security guard was barely enough to support his family. Tragically, his good intentions cost him his life. Kavalya's family was devastated. He was a kind and hard-working young man who had dropped out of college during the pandemic to help his family make ends meet. In a time when jobs were scarce, he took whatever work he could find, no matter how small the pay, just to ensure there was food on the table. Now, their only breadwinner was gone. During the legal proceedings, Mr. Manan's lawyer argued that his age and declining health should be considered in determining his punishment. At 58 years old, Manan was already struggling with chronic health issues, which had led to several delays in the trial due to his hospitalizations. However, both the prosecutor and medical experts deemed him fit to stand trial, and he faced justice accordingly. Throughout the process, Manan's 2 sons attended every court session, offering their support. They were also reported to have provided financial assistance to Kavalya's grieving family, though the exact amount was not disclosed. In July 2022, the Kolhapur District High Court delivered its verdict. Manon was found guilty of the premeditated attack on Kavolya that tragically ended the young man's life. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison, with provisions for monthly medical checkups due to his age and health issues. Despite his children's efforts to appeal on the grounds of his declining health and advanced age, the court rejected their request. Bhavya, deeply regretful, publicly apologized, acknowledging that the situation stemmed from her past interactions with the gym teacher, Nirov. She reiterated that she had cut all ties with Nirov long ago and had no idea where he was or how he was doing. Overwhelmed by guilt and the fallout of the incident, Bhavya resigned from her position as principal. She now lives with her son Lohit and her grandchildren, quietly trying to rebuild her life after the tragedy. What lessons can we learn from this story?